All right, let's get to some politics closer to home and some New York issues making headlines today. Andrew, what you got?
Well, Rich, the New York State budget is just about a done deal. Could get a vote as early as this week or weekend, but one highlight already generating debate. An extension of the so-called Millionaires Tax of 8.82% apparently will be in the budget deal. That tax applies to families with incomes above $2 million or singles above $1 million. The extension keeps the tax on the books past Governor Cuomo's re-election campaign in 2014. Supporters know the top-end tax helps keep taxes down on the middle class and will even help pay for a middle-class family rebate check this year. Critics say an extension will hurt businesses and investment and note that it brings the effective or essentially total tax rate for top-income New Yorkers above 50%. Rich?
Well, John, I'll start with you on this one. I didn't hear too much screaming on the right on this one. Are you a little surprised, especially with declining poll numbers for the governor? They're going along to get along, especially on this?
You know, leaving the poll numbers aside, I mean, what Republicans should be talking about in Albany is exactly this, and that's about what type of government do we want? Do we want an ever-growing, state bureaucracy, or do we want to have some limitation on the role of government? And the idea that we're going to, if you would, tax our way out of this recession in New York is never proven to be the case. So we are lining up behind an issue, frankly, that it should be the core issue for Republican legislators, and that's raising tax. Listen, it's easy to raise tax on the 1% because there's 99% of the people that are not affected, right? But the fact is that 1% pays 41%.
Right. Keep it up, John. Keep opposing the Millionaires Tax. You're doing great.
I do oppose the Millionaires Tax.
These guys will never win another election.
So it's bad politics to oppose the Millionaires Tax.
Moving on to the next argument, fracking, that is the controversial natural gas extraction method under debate in New York. Heart of the debate, cheap energy and a boost for business versus serious questions about whether the process is safe. Governor Cuomo's delayed a decision on whether to allow fracking in the state. Voters in the latest Q poll oppose fracking, but by a fairly slim margin, though support for fracking has been sliding for the past year and a half. This is a tough needle for the governor or anyone to thread politically as it divides votes along two main lines. First, location. Upstate voters support fracking. Suburban voters are split. New York City voters vehemently oppose the process. The other split along party lines. Republicans overwhelmingly support it. Democrats overwhelmingly oppose it. Independents are close to 50-50. Rich?
Dorian, how you feeling this one?
I am skeptical of any poll that involves the word fracking because I'm not convinced that most people actually know what it is. You know, there is a danger in extracting anything from the earth. BP oil spill is one example of that, and there are always going to be mishaps, there are always going to be accidents, there are always going to be disasters. But fracking has helped lead to America's energy comeback with natural gas. The Wall Street Journal just had an article out that said the fracking boom could last for 20 or 30 more years. I think it is totally insane, especially in the financial condition New York is in, to preclude that.
At the end?
Well, ask him.
Ask me.
He was DEC commissioner.
Ask him. And that's one of the reasons why I support fracking. I am very proud of the work that I've done in the environmental community, but this comes down to what we were just chatting about. Can we safely regulate this activity? It is an industrial activity. Therefore, there are risks associated with it. But with any industrial activity, there are risks. There are ships coming up and down the Hudson River as we speak, loaded with oil. But do we ban it? No. We find a way to properly regulate it.
I admit, I've done hours on this. I got every executive up and down the East Coast that have sat at the table. But when you look at what happened in Dimmock, right, in Pennsylvania, it's a mixed bag on this thing.
You know what?
It's even a mixed bag economically, how much actually comes in.
Well, the thing about this is two things on the economic. It brings local growth. There's no question about that. But that in and of itself is not the only economic benefit. Look what it would do for manufacturing in New York if we had a cheap source of clean energy in New York. Think about the manufacturing that would come back to places like Rome and Rochester that have lost manufacturing over the last 50 years. This is a game changer for New York State economy.
The downside is really only the permanent contamination of the New York City water system.
That is nonsense. That is absolute nonsense. There is no fracking in the New York City watershed. That's been taken off the table years ago. I mean, and that's what the New York City, what? And even if there was a risk, which I believe would be enormously small, the issue of the New York City watershed is off the table. That is nonsense. I mean, and that's the misinformation that's out there about fracking. Listen, you know what? Every state, including the federal government, has come to see the benefit of fracking. Obama administration had opened up on public lands a year ago.
What we have here is a failure to communicate. I'm asking a political question. Is this thing going to pass or not? Does the governor want it to pass?
You know,
I thought he did. I don't know anymore.
It's taken a long time to make the decision, and you got to think that he'd rather see this thing get decided at a later point. But I don't have any inside information.
Mr. Casino,
Richard, Mr. Chairman of the Ancon Committee.
Well, now notice how calmly I'm going to speak, Jim. Very calmly.
Keep doing this. We're not going to do your Hudson
Until
River.
you do this
City on
the
the
right
Hill.
way, which the industry has not agreed to, it makes no sense even to have the discussion. These companies are saying, trust me, we won't tell you what chemicals we use.
They've already done that on the federal level.
Not New York, they have.
They would agree to that.
They would?
Yes,
Trust
and you know
me.
what? Make them do it.
Trust
Forget
me.
it if they don't want to do it. Make them do it because that's an absolutely reasonable.
I got three words for you: Gulf of
requirement.
Mexico.
What's
I guess
that?
it really depends on how much you love or you trust business. Shall we move
Casino.
on?
No, it's
Yes.
how about how much you need economic
let's move on
development
to
in this state, which,
what
by
some
the
might
way,
call another gamble.
we are one of the slowest growing states in the country economically. And
All
here we
right.
are sitting on a reservoir of resources
Okay.
that we're not
All right.
utilizing.
Casinos in New York apparently going to be left out of this year's budget. From all the reporting out of Albany, Governor Cuomo has thrown his support behind allowing casinos in the state. Albany would have to okay it, then voters would decide whether to amend the state constitution via referendum. So would voters approve casinos? Yes and no. Asked if casinos should be allowed in New York, voters say yes by a 14-point margin, but from there you get a little fickle. Should we change the state constitution to allow casinos? It's 46-46. But voters would not want casinos in their own town. They say no by a 13-point spread. If you ask, would you want a casino in my town, Rich?
Me, I think, especially if you go to some of the places where they're talking about putting them, I think it's a good bet for New York. You disagree?
Nice pun.
Thank you.
The real fight's about putting them in New York City. The governor seems to want to keep that option in his pocket. There's almost no support for that anywhere.
Yeah.
The private polls are much worse than this. This is going to get bungled into no action, I think.
Yeah, listen, you have gaming all across the Northeast, but it really does, in my opinion, impact the lower levels of our economic ladder more dramatically. And
Negatively?
Negatively, absolutely. I mean, I remember when back in my college days, the bartender was a joke of poker, and people would literally come in, cash an entire check, and lose it playing ridiculous lottery games.
Isn't
And
that
so I
their
do think
option, though? Their
you know what?
prerogative?
It is their option, but it's one way for when the state is actually fostering that type of activity, benefiting from it, that I really have reservations about
Can't
that
they
type
do that
of
with
policy.
the lottery games now, or the lottery games
I
that
agree.
are at Yonkers or
I mean, how
Acumen?
much do we stop? The lottery games, the quick
You
draw.
were Mr. Lottery back then, weren't you?
What's that?
You were Mr. Lottery in the good old days.
When I was DEC, I used to do those commercials. But it has
Living
to,
a dream,
listen,
Richard,
on the
yeah.
other hand, though, the idea that there are Indian gaming and where we benefit
It's
very
complicated.
minimally from it,
It's
it's a very
And
complicated
also,
issue.
just because we don't have it doesn't mean people aren't going across into Connecticut, Jersey, and everywhere else. Andrew, this last one, I think is a really interesting debate.
Well, the city of Detroit, Rich, recently became the largest city in the U.S. to have its finances taken over by the state. Republican Governor Rick Snyder making that decision last week. City, of course, has seen its manufacturing hub, the auto industry, shrink dramatically. 250,000 people moving out in the past decade, $300 million deficit, $14 billion in long-term debt. Governor appointing an emergency manager who is all but guaranteed is going to target labor unions, whether they're willing to negotiate or not. But is what's happening in Detroit a warning sign for Yonkers, the fourth largest city in New York, or other cities? Yonkers has had budget woes for years. Our panelist, Richard Brodsky, certainly thinks so. This month, he penned an op-ed in the Albany Times-Union entitled Detroit on the Hudson. In it, the former Westchester County Assemblyman concludes, quote, lest we feel insulated from those realities, remember that Detroit can happen here. For anyone with eyes to see, the signs are there. Our big upstate cities are trying to get our attention. Smaller cities, counties, and school districts are careening towards the cliff, where bankruptcy and control boards await. Detroit may be the canary in the coal mine, the bird that dies, to warn us to get out or change our ways. Rich?
Well, the consequence, though, is what else are they going to do? And more importantly, they tore up basically the union contracts in Detroit. You got a better way of doing it?
Well, yeah, you got a better way to do it. First, you admit you got a problem. And unfortunately, the pleas of the mayor of Syracuse, Stephanie Miner, to let's just start talking about a new model for cities has fallen on deaf ears. The problem here isn't bad unions. It's not bad mayors. It's not bad city councils. It's a model for the economic structuring and budgeting of cities that doesn't work. When Yonkers had Otis Elevator and manufacturing jobs, it had a base it could tax.
Right.
They're gone, and the jobs that are coming back don't bring with them the real property that's taxable. So Yonkers facing a $140 million debt. If they raise taxes to their legal maximum, they can only raise another $30 million. So what do you do?
What do you do?
Well, you reconfigure the way cities